I have the privilege of introducing our guest this morning, Brian McLaren. Brian joined us in October. He's here again this morning. I am not going to give his extensive and impressive bio right now. It's all available. All of his work is available at brianmclaren.net. But Brian's an author, speaker, activist, teacher, public theologian, former pastor. He's a guide of guides, teacher of teachers. He's been involved in church planting, coaching of pastors. He's on the faculty at the Living School for Action and Contemplation. And his most recent book, Faith After Doubt, Why Your Beliefs Stopped Working and What to Do About It, is what we're going to discuss this morning. So if you've read some of the book and you've got questions, drop them in the Facebook comments or the Zoom chat. Otherwise, if anything's provoked after we hear from him, please add those after Brian shares for a few minutes. We will have a chance to converse about those questions together. Brian, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you, Matt. And as you were leading us in that beautiful, simple, profound prayer by Patrick Otuma, I just felt there's no place I'd rather be this morning than here with you all. You know, something that unites almost every American, if not every American, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever, Black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, something that unites just about all of us right now is an experience of doubt. A lot of us, I grew up in an evangelical Christian family, wonderful, loving family, and they taught me that character really mattered. I memorized so many verses as a little boy about taming the tongue and about the importance of words. You can tell already my parents knew that I might get in trouble with words, so they were urging me to memorize these verses. But they taught me this deep value that our words matter. They taught me to be fair. They taught me to be humble. They taught me to be honest. They taught me to listen to reproof and rebuke from others. And a lot of us, I doubt all of us, but a lot of us who are part of this conversation today, we were taught something similar by our parents. And then over the last 4, 5, 6 or more years, we watch our parents and our grandparents and our Sunday school teachers and our former pastors throw all that out the window. Character doesn't matter. Lying isn't that big a deal. They seem to excuse all kinds of things because there was something in a certain political figure and his party and his movement that elicited their hope. And all of that just evaporated. It was no longer Jesus first. It was America first. It was no longer one nation under God, indivisible. It was let's divide, and as long as our faction wins. It was no longer we care what's fair. It was only we care that our side wins. And this wasn't because these our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and Sunday school teachers became evil. It's because they became convinced of something. And so that put in all of us this sense of doubt. What do we make sense of this? Do I trust them anymore? Do I believe what they taught me? And so we've been living with a sense of disequilibrium and doubt for a long time now. We've just been living with it. Now, what about our parents and grandparents and Sunday school teachers who taught us those things and then seemed to throw them out? They sincerely trusted in the president and in his party leaders and supporters. They trusted in people like Franklin Graham and Jerry Falwell Jr. and Robert Jeffress and Eric Metaxas and Sean Fucht and all these people. They trusted them. And then on Wednesday, they woke up and said, what's going on here? Is this what I signed up for? And doubt began to emerge in them. Like all of you, I've been sort of glued to the videos produced by the people who were storming the Capitol building and attempting a coup. And what I heard in many of their voices, obviously there was arrogance and there was stupidity and there was violence and there was hate in some of them, but in some of them there was disillusionment. Like, he said he was coming with us. He didn't come with us. He called us to Washington to have a revolution. We thought he knew what he was doing. Where's all of our help? And we were left stranded. So even among those folks, even among the people storming the Capitol, among some of them, there was a new level of doubt. They thought they were going to go into the Capitol and be proclaimed as heroes, and now they're being arrested. In a certain sense, our whole nation today is a nation in doubt. And we're sorting through what we were taught, and we're sorting through who we trusted, and we're trying to determine what really matters. You know, I mentioned to you that I memorized a lot of Bible verses as I was growing up. But there's one verse I never memorized that really has become important to me now. It's in Paul's epistle to the Galatians. And as you may know, Paul was an early Christian leader, picking up the baton of Jesus in some ways, along with many others. But he had this, he was about to take Jesus' message even farther than it had been taken by Jesus in his lifetime, physical lifetime. Paul was about to say that the community of God that Jesus talked about, the one another, when Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, that one another included Gentiles as equal with Jews. It included women as equal with men. It included slaves as equal with the free. I mean, what a staggering statement he makes in Galatians, that everyone is a beloved child of God. And he, in a sense, is taking this thing boldly, going where no one has gone before. But he has to acknowledge, when he gets to the 5th chapter of Galatians, he has to acknowledge, look, now this creates all kinds of chaos, and people are arguing about all kinds of things. Does circumcision still matter? Does observing this or that holy day still matter? You're changing the rules of the game. What still matters? And here's this statement he makes early in Galatians chapter 5. He says, the only thing that matters. Now, anybody who makes a statement like that, your ears better perk up. The only thing that matters. He says, look, all those other things, they don't mean a thing. The only thing that matters is faith expressing itself in love. A little later, he goes on, and it's clear that this issue of faith expressing itself in love is at the center of his mind, because he says, remember, the entire law, everything we ever learned of any value, is summarized in the statement, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says, so be careful, because if you keep up this arguing, if you bite and devour one another, you will consume one another. It will be mutual consumption, mutually assured destruction. And I think many people in the United States today woke up for the first time realizing that could happen here. I know a lot of people were really shocked by what happened on Wednesday. I have to admit, I wasn't shocked. In fact, I started getting emails shortly after it happened from people saying, this is what you told us was going to happen. I'm no great prophet or anything, but the reason I was concerned about this goes back to a couple of experiences that I've had just in the last few years. Back during the Obama administration, my wife and I were sitting in a little restaurant. I live in Southwest Florida, and it was a crowded restaurant back when we used to meet in crowded restaurants. And my wife were at a little table for 2, and then next to us was a table for 4. And, we were not trying to eavesdrop on the table of four next to us, but when you're just two people eating and they're so close to you, it's hard to not hear what they're saying. And what we realize is this is a group of four people who are talking about a civil war and an insurrection. And they're talking about how the only way you can learn the truth is on AM radio. And so there were certain radio people they were listening to. And these were people you had to listen to after midnight. And that these people had told them, and now they were organizing online, and they were telling them that there would be a civil war. And they said, it will be just like the last one. Once we launch the attack, then the military and police and so on, that they'll all come behind us and we'll win. And my wife and I, our eyes are getting big. We're looking across the table. We're going, oh my gosh. And when we left the restaurant, we were just like, what was that? And so that was my first inkling that something like this was going on. Like, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 days later, I was walking, we live near the Gulf of Mexico. I was walking along the beach, and there's this group of people in front of me. They're talking about the same thing. And I realized that there was some sort of political extremist group that was having some sort of conference in this in our town. And same conversation. So I knew this was brewing even before Trump came along. But then you may know that I was invited to be part of the clergy witness in Charlottesville in 2017, when what I saw on Wednesday is almost identical to what I saw in Charlottesville. The same flags, Nazi flags, don't tread on me flags, Confederate flags, Trump flags, anti-Semitic slogans, anti-Semitic t-shirts, horrible, horrible things. Things I never thought I would see with my own eyes in my country. And I left there saying, these people are organized. These people are willing to kill. In fact, I was just up the street when young Heather Heyer was killed by a domestic terrorist using a car as a murder weapon. And I was in the middle of the crowd along with several other clergy, even before the first responders arrived, holding people, calming people. Those are things you never forget, just as none of you will ever forget watching television or your screen on Wednesday. So what this struck me as is an exact fulfillment of the warning given to us by Paul. If you bite and devour one another, you will consume one another. So in the midst of this difficulty, I think we have a phenomenal opportunity at this moment. Maybe we will listen to the radical message of the Apostle Paul, drawn from the radical message of Jesus. The only thing that matters is faith expressing itself in love. Not faith expressing itself in beliefs, not faith expressing itself in ideology, not faith expressing itself in partisan loyalty, faith expressing itself in love. And so now we face this moment where each of us will become an agent either of mutually assured destruction or an agent of healing. And that means love. Love does not mean backing off when people are evil and saying, we'll let you have your way. That's not love. That's complicity. That's cowardice. Love is strong. Love is courageous. Love sometimes means speaking up when you see someone saying something that's wrong. And if you tell them they're wrong, they'll only get defensive. So sometimes the best thing you can do is offer your witness or testimony and say, I don't believe that. I see that differently. And you're not saying, I'm going to convince you. You're just raising your hand and saying, I won't go along with that in my presence. I don't think that's true. And they might get angry at you. Things would have been far more peaceful if you just remained silent. But listen, remaining silent and responding with anger and hate are not your only options when you want to express your faith and love. You can have the courage to differ graciously, and you can have the courage to stand for the truth, and you can have the courage to call people to something better. I find whenever I'm called to do that, I get emotional. Sometimes I start to cry, and then I'm embarrassed that I'm crying. But then I realize, no, this is my heart speaking. I care, and I'm not ashamed of my emotions. And so, brothers and sisters and friends, this has been a hard week. Let's acknowledge that to go through the kind of doubt we've had to go through, some of us for several years and some of us for several days, we're now plunged into this shared experience of doubt and questioning and wondering how we move forward. You know, on January 20th, President-elect Biden will make a vow. He'll take an oath of office. And it strikes me on that day. In fact, a dear friend of mine is organizing something she calls the People's Inauguration, Valerie Kaur. And a number of us, I'm participating in this. What we're saying to people is on Inauguration Day, we can't just assume that the president making a commitment is going to solve all of our problems. In a certain sense, every one of us needs to take a kind of oath of office. Our office is the office of citizens. And we're going to use our power, our voice, our social media, who we refuse to listen to and who we support. And we're going to use the power that each of us have toward as an expression of faith in love. A lot of people think that doubt is only something destructive and harmful. In times like these, doubt is what actually can save us. If we're willing to say, I'm willing to doubt what that powerful person is telling me. I'm willing to doubt what that person with a gun is telling me. I'm willing to doubt what that person whose threat is making threats is telling me. I want to listen for a deeper truth, a deeper voice, a deeper wisdom. Doubt is really painful, but it's an important opportunity. And may God give each of us the wisdom and humility and guidance and insight to seize the open door, to enter the opportunity for us presented by this difficult moment. To say nothing else matters, only faith expressing itself in love. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Such a gift. If you've got questions about the events of this week, what Brian just shared, faith and doubt in general, which should be intense enough in an ideal world, drop those in the Facebook comments or in the Zoom chat. Thelma, it looks like we've got one in Zoom. Do you want to start there?
Sure. Thanks so much, Brian, for being with us here this morning. We have a question for you. Many of us learned how to suppress doubt from our families and churches. How do we teach our children how to doubt well?
Oh, what a great question. Maybe I could tell a quick story in response to that question. A previous book I wrote was called The Great Spiritual Migration. I told this story in that book about a mother who her child learned in Sunday school the story of Elijah and the fiery chariot. Some of you will know this story. There was a prophet, Hebrew prophet named Elijah, and it's a long story. I won't go into the whole story, but he was basically transported out of this earth in a fiery chariot. And she asked me, she said, I don't know if I believe that really happened. My little girl, I forget, 8 years old, whatever, said, Mommy, did that really happen? She said, what should I say to my daughter? Many of us were taught, of course, if it's in the Bible, it really happened. Of course, even in the Bible, we have parables. Even in the Bible, we have books like the book of Job that really appear to be kind of poetry and sagas and so on. But if it was in the Bible, it really happened. And so I'm not allowed to doubt it. So she asked me, what should I say? And I said, well, what did you say? And she said, I said to her, some stories are true. Some stories are make-believe. Some stories that are make-believe are stories that help us see something that's true. And some stories don't help us see anything that's true. And she then said to her daughter, what do you think? And I told her, what a perfect answer, because what she did is she didn't tell her daughter what to think. She helped her daughter think. She gave her some categories. Things can fit in these different categories. And she then invited her daughter to be part of the interpretive community, to say, what do you think? She didn't say, whatever you think is okay, but she said, you have a voice. What do you think? In this book, Faith After Doubt, I tell the story of one of my sons, who's now, in his 30s, but when he was a boy, we were driving home from church. I was a pastor, and it was just he and me in the car. And I said to him, how did Sunday school go today? And he said, oh, Dad, he gives me an eye roll. He says, it was weird, And I said, well, what happened? He said, they tried to tell us that this group of people were running away from some other people. And then the sea opened up and let them go through. And then when the bad guys came through, the sea closed on them. Can you believe it? I said, well, what was so bad about it? He says, it was just so far-fetched, he said. And I didn't even know he knew that word, far-fetched. But it gave us a great opportunity to talk. And then we talked about what could that story mean? Well, I think this is a really important moment to tell our children, listen, bad things happen. Now, our children have a need for safety. And so we need to encourage, give them reassurance. We're going to do everything, we can to keep you safe. You don't need to worry. But sometimes bad things happen. And sometimes people that we should be able to trust, we can't trust. And sometimes people get misled by other people and they do terrible and crazy things. So I think we can help our children in that way. In a sense, we're telling them that part of being a good human being is having the ability to know who to doubt and who to trust, and when to doubt and when to trust. And we're doing our job. Our parents may not have done that for us, but we have to help people do that. The best teachers, we often say, don't just teach us what to think, they teach us how to think. So I hope all of us who are parents or grandparents now, in my case, can aspire to be those kinds of teachers.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up to that question, Brian. How to doubt and when to doubt, how to trust and who to trust, that sort of a thing. But connected to what you shared sort of in your opening, that doubt is what can save us. But also I think doubt is what got us here in the destructive sense. So yes. On the one hand, many of us have been in environments where our doubts have been labeled as dangerous and harm has been caused because we weren't allowed to doubt. On the other hand, there's a certain kind of doubting of authority and truth that's been encouraged that's created the situation. So how could you speak to constructive doubt or constructive deconstruction and what that actually could be and how to navigate between all of that? Because on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you should question what your pastor's saying. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, you can't trust the media. Like there's that kind of doubting as well.
Yeah, it's so well said. And this is one of the really destructive things that's happened in the last few years. There was a moment in 2016 before the presidential election, but during the Republican National Convention, you may remember when now President Trump stood up before the nation and the world and said, only I can fix this. And it seems to me a very smart rule of thumb for us is when someone tells you that they're the only one who's right and they're the only one who can fix it, often that is a good reason to be suspicious of them. But so many things I could say about this, Matthew, but this is where our religion can really get in trouble, because what our religions can do is, if we have unscrupulous leaders who just want power and control, then they won't care about what's true. They'll just tell you, believe what I say. And then they'll make threats if you don't. And they'll give you rewards if you repeat what they say. So this is a huge part of our learning opportunity now, that we have to become more savvy about who we trust and who we don't. And the problem isn't just in that unscrupulous leader or con artist or manipulator. If anybody's interested, it's about bias. It's called Why Don't They Get It? And then the subtitle is overcoming bias in others and yourself. And this problem of bias has to do with glitches in our brain that make us susceptible to misinformation, that make us susceptible to believing people who tell us what we want to hear, even if it's not true. And so this, to me, is one of the great needs that we have now, is not just to be worried about those other people who might mislead us, but this is what Jesus said when he said, don't just look at the splinter in somebody else's eye, look at the stick in your own eye. Pay attention to our own biases that make us vulnerable to being misled. So right now, this is all in play. This is all in play. And we're either going to become wiser in this moment, or we're going to reap the fruits of foolishness. And so here is a phenomenal opportunity for all of us to gain that precious biblical value of wisdom.
That's so helpful, Brian. Thanks so much. Our next question is, what does it look like to hold great anger at injustice within us while holding great love within us? Can you speak to that tension?
What a fantastic question. And can I just say, it is super pleasurable to hold great anger without love. There's a certain delight in it. It stirs up something from deep within us. Exactly the kind of things that Paul wrote about in that Galatians chapter 5 passage that I mentioned, where he talks about there's something deep in our gut, in our flesh and in the sort of reptilian brain part of us that just wants to go all aggro on people, So there's a certain pleasure of just holding anger without love. But when you have love, sometimes the love itself stimulates the anger. So when you love your child and your child is bullied on the playground, you feel anger because you love your child. The love and anger are connected. But I think one of the things I try to do in the book is talk about this process of, like, you can even define stages of it that describe a process we go through where first our love is only for ourselves and we get angry when anybody gets in my way. But then we love our family and our children and we get angry at anybody who gets in their way. And then we love maybe our nation or our party or our race or our religion, and we get angry at anybody who gets in their way. But then what happens when we love everybody with non-discriminatory, universal, divine love, the kind of love Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, look, God loves everybody so much, whether they're good or evil. He lets them have the sun to grow their crops and the rain to water their crops. God is good to everybody. When we have love like that, the interesting thing about our anger is we stop being angry at anybody as an individual, as if they're only the problem. And we become angry at the things that are destroying those people, including our enemies. So I'm super angry at politicians who knew that our president had these malignant tendencies. In fact, many of them opposed him in the primary and said that he would destroy our country if he were elected. And then they went on to support him because of their own political gain. I'm really angry at those people, but you know what? I have greed in me and I have fear in me, and I understand how that happens. So it doesn't make me hate the people. It makes me hate the greed and hate the power of fear and hate the power of peer pressure and all the rest that plays into it. So then I'm not creating one group of us against another group of them. I'm saying all of us have a problem that is within all of us, and we need to start focusing on that. I hope that helps. It's a great question. There's so much more we could say about it.
This is a good one. I mean, they're all good, but I think prayer is one of the first things that really it's hard to pick up the pieces when we enter into a season of doubt or we're brought into a moment like the one we're living. So for those of us who've been taught that praying is like a slot machine, jackpot, like if you pray enough, you do it right, you get your wish. How does that intersect with helpful and healthy doubt? And what is a helpful way of embracing prayer during times like this?
Oh, another great question. I remember a preacher years ago using an image that always sticks with me. She said, imagine God is like this huge ship, a huge like cargo ship that you'd see out in the ocean. And I'm like this tiny little boat. And she said, often in our prayers, we're throwing a rope onto the ship, trying to pull that big ship our way to get God to do what we want God to do. She said, the irony is that in the pulling of the rope, we pull ourselves closer to the ship. So instead of thinking of prayer as getting God to do what we want God to do, if we were to say, no, what prayer is really about is learning to align our desires with God's desires. Now, here's where it gets tricky, because there have been a whole lot of religious leaders who've been saying, that God is on the side of racists, and God is on the side of homophobes, and God is on the side of misogynists, and God, that God is for all these things, and that God doesn't care about a little bit of genital grabbing as long as you, whatever. And so all of these people have been telling us what God wants. In a sense, prayer is where we center down inside of us and we say, what do I really think God wants? I'm not going to subcontract my thinking out to somebody else to do it for me. What do I believe God wants, and how can I be aligned with that? What I'd recommend in times like these then is, instead of worrying that God needs us to pick the right thing to advise God to do in the midst of a crisis like this, then instead we make our prayer personal. God, help me be an instrument of your peace. God, help me see what I don't see. God, help me learn what I need to learn. God, help me to be brave. God, when I see other people selling out and I see other people becoming hateful, help me not to do that. In other words, we take that wisdom about not focusing on the splinter in someone else's eye, but we focus on the issues and struggles we have. I think that would be a good start. And then the only other thing I'd say is there's a prayer that many of us who grew up in liturgical settings would know in Greek, Kyrie eleison, which just means Lord have mercy. And to be able to look at this nation and all of its division and all of its misinformation with ridiculous QAnon and dangerous QAnon conspiracies and people believing all kinds of lies. You remember Jesus looking over the crowd. He says, they're harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And we look at the whole mess. And instead of saying, I love those and I hate those, we say, Lord, have mercy on everybody. And now help me be an agent of your mercy and peace and reconciliation, not to paste over the problems, but to be also to stand for justice, even to be willing to suffer and struggle for justice. A lot of us have lived with an illusion that we have to doubt, and that is that right will prevail easily. No, it's not like that. Even the story of Jesus, from between Christmas and Easter, we recall the story of Jesus. And one thing his story tells us, working on God's side is not an easy road, but it's the right road. And I think prayer is our way of pulling ourselves to be closer to that direction that God's Spirit is really leading.
So this next one, Brian, is one that I know many of us are struggling with right now. How do we speak truth into our work environments where there are such firm disagreements about what that truth is?
Yes. Well, I'd say first we have to avoid two dangers. One is the danger of I have to fix everybody else. That's not going to happen. But second is the danger, my voice doesn't count. No, it does. Your voice counts. And for you not to raise your voice when you can becomes in some ways a way of being complicit with lies and misinformation. So I have this is such a great question. And I just think we all need some practical guidance on it. So I for years have been telling people, here's what gets me by in those circumstances. Very simple little statement. Wow, I see that differently. 5 words. Wow. I say that because I want to get people's attention. I don't want to raise my voice and be angry, but I want to let them know I feel something here. Wow. I'm not going to say you are wrong. I'm going to define myself. I see that differently. I call that the courage to differ graciously. And what will often happen is when you say that is people will say, well, what do you mean? And if it's a heated argument, I'd not recommend you get into it then. I'd recommend you say, look, if you're curious, if you'd like to talk about it, let's do it some other time in private. I'd be glad to. Anybody who wants to know how I see this differently, I'll be glad to tell you. But I don't want to be part of a big, argument, public argument here. Because when we get into that, everybody digs in their heels, right? But you have to speak up. Wow, I see that differently. Sometimes, though, you'll find that people will just shut down and they won't be interested in how you see it. But the very act of you putting up a differing voice and doing it with courage, yet grace, not insult, not hostility, what that often will do is it'll make people just back down. Because here's what's really often happening. These people who spout off these opinions and repeat what they heard on some bizarre conspiracy site and all the rest, it's not like they've really thought through all this. All they're doing is they're luxuriating in agreement and they're luxuriating in shared grievance. I'm angry about this. I want to make sure everybody else joins me in anger. And I only will feel safe if everybody joins me in anger. And that's how these things sort of spread like a virus. Your simple voice, wow, I see that differently, could stop the virus. It's like putting on a mask and stopping a virus from spreading.
This is a combination of a couple questions. But I think for many of us who sense that while Christianity has been complicit in empire in some way, almost since the beginning, and right now being able to see Christianity is part of the problem, a version of it.
Yes.
How do we begin to untangle that with our limited vision, but also, is that even a worthwhile endeavor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, listen, so the book that, I just wrote, it's called Faith After Doubt. And I think it might help people sort that through, to find a way to be Christian that is different from this destructive way people are being Christian. But I'm actually working on a book that will come out in the middle of next year now called Do I Stay Christian? So this is a huge, I think I'm very in sync with people who are struggling with this. And maybe I can offer a simple analogy. If we get through this mess as a country, and I think we will, I think we have I think we're going to have a sustained period of domestic terrorism. I think it works very much like a pandemic. It spreads from person to person. It gets rooted. It keeps spreading. And it doesn't die out suddenly as a certain person erroneously predicted. It doesn't just go away. It has a long trail of destruction. And as you in Michigan know, with a group of people who plotted to kidnap your governor, put her on trial in a mock trial and stream it on social media, and then execute her and publicly bury her. This is a pretty chilling thing to realize. That's the kind of people who are out there in Michigan and all around our country. I live in Florida. We have our share of them too, who are planning these things, and they've invested all their ego. They've risked their lives. They're not going to back down anytime soon. And so if we're going to get through this, one of the ways we're going to get through is because of good lawyers. Because these lawyers are going to help ensure justice. But let me tell you something. We're in this trouble because of a lot of really bad lawyers who defended people to do terrible things. Now, in a time like this, when the profession of law is being used to subvert everything that's good and is being used to protect what's good, is that a time for you to say, I'm just going to stop being a lawyer because my profession is polluted? The reason it's polluted is because it's so important. It plays such an important role. And I would say, that's why, no offense, but I have very little respect for a cabinet member from your state who decided to resign this week when she could have decided to stand for the 25th Amendment. If she really thinks things are bad enough to resign, she should have used her cabinet position to stand for the 25th Amendment. And so I would say, I understand the stress of just wanting to get away, quit being a lawyer, resign from the cabinet, and just stop being a Christian. But the problem is we're left with being human, and we humans are a mess, and you can't resign from being a human. So what I would say is your desire to separate yourself from something that's become corrupted and ugly, like the profession of law, like being a judge, like being a politician, at this time when politicians are so craven. The irony is now we need good politicians more than ever. And so at a time when so many Christians are being craven, this is a time when we need Christians, other Christians, to be courageous and generous and loving and wise and deep, and to just sort of float along as a mediocrity is not an option. Now we need people to really stand up. I know that's not easy, but that's my honest, heartfelt answer.
Brian, it seems like at times maybe our nation's so divided because people are grasping for certainty in a time of uncertainty. So from your perspective, what does it look like to live in relationship to doubt as we move forward with faith and love?
Yeah, another great question, Thelma. And that's why I've seized on that passage from Galatians, because this is exactly what was happening in the earliest years of the Christian movement. Jesus comes along with this radical message. Those people that you thought we should stone, he's ready to protect them. Those people you thought we should reject, he's willing to go to their house for dinner. Those people that we could label enemies and therefore hate, he's saying, no, actually, God loves those people and you need to love them too. And the way of healing doesn't come through violence, it comes through love. So that conflicted situation Paul enters into, and he doesn't just say, wow, I don't know what to do. Let's just give up. No, he says, look, all of those things you're arguing about, they don't mean a thing. The only thing that matters is faith, trust in the goodness of God, trust, as Dr. King said, that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Trust that God is at work in the world. Trust that God's love will prevail. Trust and express that in love yourself. So what I would say is we need to become more certain of love as we realize that some of the other things we were certain about have been proven either false or certainly highly questionable. And that process is exactly what we see going on in the Bible. Let me give one other quick example. Even before Jesus, there's all kinds of debate about what really matters to God. Does God want people to be vigilant and sacrifice? Is God's big concern that we go fight wars all the time in God's name? How many sacrifices is enough? What should we do with insiders who start to become a little lax? Should we kill them? Should we? There are verses that say we should kill them. There are verses that say we should kill rebellious children. How far do we go with this? A lot of uncertainty. And Micah comes along and he says, look, what's enough? What does God desire? And then he says, God has shown you, humanity, what is good and what the Lord requires of you. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. So in times of uncertainty, a lot of things are up for grabs, but this is when you have the chance to focus on the essentials that matter most. And that's, I think it's our only way through at this moment. People have tried to divide us over 1,000 different things, and almost always for their own advantage. You go back behind this and there's somebody getting rich. There's somebody avoiding prosecution for crimes. There's somebody exercising power. There's somebody fulfilling his narcissistic fever dream. And of course they're going to cause chaos. But now we center in on what really matters. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God, faith expressing itself in love, love your neighbor as yourself, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Suddenly those core issues become central.
Brian, one of the things that I found so helpful about your book is your willingness to name doubt as loss and early on as something that brings about grief. And it reminded me of a quote from Scott Cormode at Fuller Seminary, who says, people don't resist change, they grieve loss.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just speak to the complexity of that loss around doubt and some ways through that grief, because
Yes.
the loss of family, friends, jobs, because of these questions can be so significant and enough to keep us from not moving towards those doubts in a healthy way.
Yes. Well, Matt, you speak as someone who has felt that yourself, and maybe that's the best way for me to respond is very personally. You know, I grew up with every kind of privilege, wonderful family, born in the era of civil rights, but when white privilege was still unchallenged, and of course that's such a theme in what's going on right now. Anxious white people who are afraid to have to share their world and go through a change in their thinking about how the social dominance hierarchy is supposed to be, all that sort of thing. So I grew up with all that. And then I became a pastor, and I had a lot going for me. I wrote my first book, and I remember saying to my wife, and I wrote this book because I felt something was rotten, something was wrong, something wasn't working. And I was so excited to get a book contract and so excited that I was going to speak my truth. And then the week the book was supposed to come out, or maybe 2 weeks before, I said to my wife, I'm really afraid. She said, you seem kind of stressed. What's going on? You'd think I would be excited. My book's coming out. I thought, when my book comes out, I'm going to lose a lot of friends. And with every succeeding book that came out, the same anxiety would rise up, because I was having the courage to speak my truth. And then I realized that some people wouldn't like it. Some of you would know a magazine called Christianity Today. Once I got a phone call from an editor at Christianity Today. I was actually a columnist for one of their publications. And this editor called me and said, look, Brian, I just came out of a meeting and I'm so disturbed. I need to tell you that one of my colleagues, one of my fellow editors, said in the meeting that he is out to destroy you. He said, those are his exact words. He said, so I just want to tell you, watch your back. I believe in you. I appreciate the good work you're doing, but some of my colleagues are very upset with me for giving you a platform. And, I've had lifelong friends turn on me. I've had fears that I would lose my way of making a living, and I've had, and on top of that, I've had death threats, and I've had to be escorted out of places with security and all the rest. So there's a lot of losses that you can go through, and the proper time to decide the worthwhileness of those losses is not when you're feeling them most intensely, but to wait. Like so many things, the fruit or the consequences take time to build. But my gosh, if I hadn't have had the courage to speak my truth, I don't know what I don't know what I would have become. And can I just say to all of you who are younger than me, it's a very different thing to reach your 60s as I am and feel as I do, that my only regrets are that I was not more courageous, compared to friends of mine who feel that they've wasted their lives because they just played the game and they just went along with things. There's a lot of people getting knocks on their door from the FBI this week who were part of going into the Capitol building, and they just went along. And going along is euphoric. Imagine the euphoria they felt when they felt that they were patriots and heroes, and then they wake up and that's falling apart. So this is reality. We live in a world where we can be misled. We live in a world where we can be craven. We live in a world where we can be cowardly. And we also live in a world where we can be courageous. And so that seems to me to be part of the human dilemma and the human drama and the human opportunity that we all share, that's sort of staring us all in the face this week.
Brian, connected to that loss, it's one thing, it is a loss to lose friends and to maybe feel a divide with people at work. But what would you say to the members of our community that are asking questions about, when this is my son or daughter or parent, and they are buying into some of these conspiracy theories, or there just seems to be such a chasm between us? What are some steps we can take forward in response to that?
Yeah, I've been very involved. I've never, personally been an alcoholic or drug addict myself. Through no virtue, it just doesn't seem to be something that, I have other temptations and problems and weaknesses and so on. But both as a pastor and in my family, extended family, I've been close to addiction, and I've been close to mental illness. And one of the things you learn is that if you just hope it will get better, it doesn't get better. I mean, maybe 1 in 1,000 times it does, but usually if you just sit back and think, oh, hopefully it'll get better, in my experience, addiction gets worse and mental illness gets worse. And so it's a great risk. And any of you been involved in trying to have an intervention with a family member with mental illness or addiction, it can blow up. The person can react and get mad. And so it's very easy to just keep putting it off. But here's what I'd recommend. I'd recommend you have a conversation with those people you're concerned about. And I'd recommend that you prepare for it, you plan for it. You maybe even write it down in a letter. And you say to them, listen, I'm really concerned about something. And I wonder if you'd be willing to listen to me for 4 minutes while I read you something without interrupting. I promise I will listen to you for 4 minutes when I finish. But I would like 4 minutes for you to be willing to listen to me, speak from my heart. And it might help to read it because often it's very emotional and you need to plan so you don't waste your 4 minutes. But there are things like that you can do. And then I think you can say to them, you may not be ready to hear what I need to say to you right now. You may not be ready to hear right now, but I need to say it because I love you. And later on, you may be willing to accept it. And even if you don't accept it, I'll continue to love you. But I need to tell you what's on my heart. Not a manipulative statement. Again, I'm going to speak the truth that I need to speak to you. I'm going to speak it in love, and I'm not going to demand you agree with me. Here's the irony. The more pressure you put on the person to agree with you, the more the person will resist your pressure. One last thought on this. Weird place to learn a lesson. I was standing in a long line in an airport. My flight had been canceled, and it was one of those horribly long lines where you have to wait to get reassigned. And I've waited, 45 minutes, and I'm about 5 people from the front, and somebody runs up and gets into the front of the line. And the fellow in front of me just reached over and tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around, and the fellow said, "I hate it when people do what you just did." He didn't say, "Get out of here." He just says, "I hate it when people do what you just did." And what was, to me, what struck me is so powerful about that statement. It wasn't silence, and it wasn't asking for a fight. It was just making a statement about my truth. And that's what I think can have power. I'm concerned about you. I'm really worried about you. When I hear you talk like that, it breaks my heart. And you don't expect to win. You just use your voice to put some truth out there. And then maybe the one other thing I would say is that if you do plan this, I mean, sometimes these just happen spontaneously, but if you plan it, from social science research, if you have 3 or maximum 4 reasons why you would like them, or things that you would like them to hear, don't do 5, 6, 7, 8, because there's something called complexity bias that kicks in. People need a simple, clear message. And sometimes the more you tell them, the less effective it is. I better stop and take my own advice at that point.
I think maybe 2 more questions, if that's okay. And Thelma, I'm wondering if you want to get to Jen's question that's in the Zoom chat before I ask the final question.
Sure. So really love this next question. Brian, so often we learn more about love from those who are marginalized in our society. And just curious, what are you learning right now from those who are marginalized, those who do not hold social power that can help us forward in this moment?
You know, there's a lot of people saying this, and I think they're right. If America is saved through this, it will be because of Black women. You think about the voice, and I just noticed so many Black women, and I don't want to say just them. I mean, obviously, if America is saved, it's going to be because of Native Americans. I think about the people who stood at Black Rock, and they were trying to defend a very legitimate life and death matter for themselves, and yet our government crushed them. And then to watch, imagine how it would feel for a Native American who's at Black Rock and their allies who stood with them. And then watch what's happened in the Capitol this week. It would be horrible. Did I say Black Rock? I guess it was Standing Rock. Sorry, I'm mixing up things there. But so here's what I've noticed among Black women and other minority leaders in recent days and weeks. They are not backing down on the truth that needs to be spoken, but they're just speaking it. And they're not speaking it with hate, but they're not mincing words. They're telling the truth. They're speaking the truth in love. And they're not advocating violence, and they're not advocating revenge. I have an African-American friend, and I was in a meeting with her, with a group of people, and it was a racially mixed group, but white people were in the majority, and there was some racial tension in the room. And she said, you know, you white people seem afraid. You seem afraid that if you give up power and share equal power with your neighbors of color, you're afraid that they will do to you what your ancestors did to them. Then she said to me, why would we ever want to behave like white people after what white people have done to us? And I'll never forget that statement. Why would we ever want to behave like white people after what white people have done to us? And so this is the moment for all of us who are white. We're going to have to come to terms with our whiteness and our you know, the heritage and legacy of white supremacy that we didn't ask for, but we have. And we're going to have to now come together in an understanding that will require us to tap into many of our own fears. And I just have to say, the wisdom of all the people of color, male, female, whatever, who are trying to speak to white people now, not backing down, but not being hateful either. It's not easy, but I think it's getting through. It's getting through. Not to some people. Some people are just getting mad and they're getting vengeful, and that's their prerogative. They are doing that. We saw it on Wednesday. But more and more people are breaking through. And it may be that Wednesday itself, when they reflect on what would have happened if a group of tens of thousands of people of color had gathered in Washington, how they would have been treated. Or if they'd tried to storm the Capitol, people are, maybe now, it's pathetic how slow we are to see. But this is what an amazing statement. Why would we want to be like you? We don't want to be vengeful. We want to be different. And that's our hope going forward.
Brian, I think we'll close with this question, and if there's anything else you want to share, please feel free. When I think about our community, and I think of the hope that sparked something like Open Circle in West Michigan, of all places, that there could be a space where we honestly name the spiritual foundation of a more loving world exists in our humanity, our hopes, our stories, our wounds, our biases, that if God exists, God is found in between all of those things, and that there is a way for us to hold that together. How do we do that moving forward without sort of falling into false equivalence? How do we extend dignity to all people as a community without saying all ideas are equally helpful? Yeah. Without just becoming a nice progressive, our own little progressive echo chamber?
Yeah, one of the things COVID has done for us is that it's helped us realize that a virus doesn't care if it has a Democratic or Republican host, an American or Brazilian host. A virus helps us see that we're all in this together as human beings. And so I'm going to say something that will seem paradoxical, but I'm certain this is not contradictory. I think it's the way things work. I'm going to speak very specifically. We need progressive Christians, the kind of Christians who are willing to have this kind of conversation. We need progressive Christians to become stronger in their identity without being hostile toward other identities, stronger in what we stand for, but not with a clenched fist, but with the open hand. Stronger so we speak out more, stronger so we speak our truth more, stronger so we continue to love and reconcile with everyone we possibly can. The kind of unity we need doesn't require people who stand for love and justice and truth and mercy. It doesn't require those people to reduce their love, justice, mercy. It requires them to hold those things strong, but to enter into relationship with others in a contagious way. Maybe the last thing I would say is this. I mentioned a kind of leader before who says, only I can fix this. Trust me. Don't listen to anybody. Let's suppress any voice that disagrees with me. Mock them, make fun of them, call them names, call them enemy of the people. Anyone who questions me will suppress, right? That's one kind of leadership, authoritarian leadership. Now, here's the problem. In a time of authoritarian leadership, we may think we hate all leadership. Just like in a time when lawyers are defending the indefensible, we might say we hate all lawyers. But in a time of authoritarian leaders, we need wise, servant, Christ-like leaders more than ever. And here's the difference. Authoritarian leaders are willing to send you in to die for their profit. We saw that happen on Wednesday. Send you out to commit crimes that they will then claim they're innocent from. Those are corrupt, disgusting authoritarian leaders, right? But we need the kind of leaders who don't say, I want power over you. What they're really saying is, I want you to have power, and I want to help us build shared power, and I want us to use power to benefit the common good. That's what love is, really. Love is using power to bring benefit, not just to myself, but to everyone. Yeah, all of you who are parents know this. You had the power to reproduce, And yeah, some personal pleasure was involved in that power. But that power brought the phenomenal responsibility, a lifelong responsibility of having another human being or multiple other human beings who you would give your life for. The power brought you to the place of self-giving and self-sacrifice. And we need leaders who will live that way. And those leaders don't lord it over others, but they elevate others and help them become leaders who help others become leaders. And that's what a movement is about. And at the core of a movement, though, we need people who are committed and strong and have wisdom and have experience and all the rest. And that's what we need now. And frankly, to this community and to you as specific leaders, that's why we need each of your voices at this time.
Brian, thank you. Thank you for your book. Thank you for the space you held with us this morning. Thank you for, we would have had a much different conversation on a different week, and your willingness to step into this with our community. Couldn't be more grateful. I said to my wife a few days ago, Stephanie, that I have not encountered a leader as generous and as open-handed with his talent and his time and his presence as I have with you. So thank you for so generously offering that this morning. And Open Circle friends and whoever else might see this, Brian's not going to say it super because he is so kind and generous and open-handed. Faith After Doubt is a great book and you should buy it. So I hope you do. I've worked through it several times now and it's been super helpful for me. So I will end our time together with these words from Brian's book. It's a little bit of a different take on the Beatitudes, and I think it fits this moment well. Quick reminder, 7 p.m. tonight, we're going to be practicing the way of the circle together. To process any of this further, check your email for the Zoom link. If you don't get emails from us, opencirclecommunity.org on the homepage. This box says get connected. Everybody's welcome to join us tonight, probably 30 to 45 minutes at the most. So hear these words from Brian McLaren. Blessed are the curious, for their curiosity honors reality. Blessed are the uncertain, and those with second thoughts, for their minds are still open. Blessed are the wanderers, for they shall find what is wonderful. Blessed are those who question their answers, for their horizons will expand forever. Blessed are those who often feel foolish, for they are wiser than those who always think themselves wise. Blessed are those who are scolded, suspected, and labeled as heretics by the gatekeepers, for the prophets and mystics were treated in the same way by the gatekeepers of their day. Blessed are those who know their unknowing, for they shall have the last laugh. Blessed are the perplexed, for they have reached the frontiers of contemplation. Blessed are they who become cynical about their cynicism and suspicious of their suspicion, for they will enter the second innocence. Blessed are the doubters, for they shall see through false gods. And blessed are the lovers, for they shall see God everywhere. So grateful to be a part of this community with each of you. Peace be with you, my friends. We'll see you soon.